What's up guys and welcome back to Monique. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? If you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology and maybe you're just here because you want to see a little bit of rough and tumble in Virgil's Aeneid, well then this is not only the video for you, this is also the channel for you. You guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. But on topic of today's video, and as you can see from the title, we're going to be discussing Book 5 of the Aeneid. If I could summarize Book 5 into a one sentence, it would just be funeral games for Anchises. If you guys watch my Iliad series, you will know I am not the biggest fan of funeral games, and I understand their importance, and I want to make that very clear now, because I got a lot of people in the comments being like, Erica, you don't understand the purpose of funeral games. I do. I just find that they are very disruptive to a narrative, in my personal opinion. However, it's obviously important to acknowledge that these are very insightful into the ancient world, that funeral games are very important to show not only the importance of a character, but also they show us really what people of the time would have done in such circumstances and what was normal, what was seen as respectful, and so on and so forth. So on those fronts, on that front, it is incredibly important to understand, to analyze the funeral games. But again, in a narrative, we're used to a storyline, and then all of a sudden they're like, we're gonna interrupt this narrative just so that we can have these games. Why? Why? There are all these people that I don't give a shit about. There are all these people who take part that you either never hear of again, or they're incredibly minor characters that you're like, this didn't change my view of them. Why did they need the time of day? Genuinely, I don't know in a story why we need to disrupt what we're reading in order to just read this person punched another person. I don't get it. But that's just my personal opinion. So today we're going to be discussing the funeral games, and with that being said, why don't we just roll into the narrative? So, where I left you in the last book, Dido had just fallen on her funeral pyre. She had thrown herself, quite honestly, on her funeral pyre, so we're coming off the back end of that. But the book opens with Aeneas' point of view. So Aeneas is now in his boat. As we know, he's left the shores of Carthage. But at the beginning of this book, him and his men have turned around to look back at the walls, and they see this giant plume of smoke above the city, and they have no idea what has happened. We do get a note from Virgil that the men on the boat do understand what happens when a woman is driven to madness, which is something I'm not necessarily a fan of, but he does say that, so the men do have this little inkling, shall we say, this really bad gut feeling about what's gone on, but no one knows for certain, and so they're not really discussing it in those terms. But we do know that all the men kind of think they know what's gone on based on the plumes of smoke, because what else could have caused such a big fire in the city? As the men are all looking back at the shore and they're distracted, there is one man who is not distracted, and that is the best helmsman, the best steersman. Can you say that? I don't even think so. The best steering guy of the boat, right? His name is Palinurus, and he notices that there's a cloud that suddenly appears above them, so he can't see the sky, he can't really steer them effectively. And obviously his first response is, well, now what? Bear in mind, Dido did warn them about the whole winter storms thing that were happening. So she was like, why would you leave? Blah, blah. We went over this in the last book. So the fact that they're shocked that this has happened, you're reading it like, Dido literally told you if you left the shores, this would happen, so I don't know what you were expecting. Anywho, Palinurus calls over Aeneas, and he's like, yo, mate, I gotta tell you the situation of what's going on. This is what I think we should do. I think that there's clearly gonna be a storm a brewing. If there's a cloud and it's covering up the sky, it means I can't read where we're going, and I can't figure out how to get best to Latium. Therefore, what we should do is we should actually go to the nearest port, which is probably Sicily, go back there, park for a little bit, spend some time there, wait out the storm. This is clearly where fortune is guiding us. We should just follow and go that way instead. And Aeneas, to his credit, just replies going, that sounds like a great idea, Palinurus, let's go. So the boats then steer to the port of Sicily. They are using the winds really to steer them that way. The winds are guiding them back to Sicily and back to the port of Eryx, which is spelled like this, E-R-Y-X off the top of my head. So that's where they go, and that is because there are Trojans there. There's a guy who rules over this land. His name is Acestes. It's very similar to a lot of the other names that we have found. So I'm going to be struggling because we have not only Aeneas, which is an A name, Anchises, who's his dad. We have his best friend, Aeneas' best friend, who's called Achates. And then we have this guy called Acestes. Like, really, Virgil, you couldn't help me out? Like, a little bit, give me a different name. But anywho, Acestes is the king of this place, and basically the men get off the boat, and like in every other of the epic works, so both the Iliad and the Odyssey, this is a very common theme. Men get off the boat, they approach the king. The king says, sure, you can totally stay with me, no problem. And that is exactly what happens here. So the men go to all of their respective beds for the night. And in the morning, when the morning comes around, Aeneas gathers all of his men together and he makes his public speech to them where he says, the storms are going to be a common thing. They're going to keep coming. So what I think we should do is we should really make ourselves comfortable here in Sicily. And instead, we should spend some time doing some funeral games for my dad. Since it's been about a year since we've lost him, I would really like to honor him. So we should do that here. What I suggest is that we should have 9 days of sacrificing offerings to the gods, really honor them in this way. And then after that, we should do the games after the gods have been appeased. And all the men, unsurprisingly, are like, yes, let's do it. I mean, to be honest, guys, what else are they gonna do and how else are they gonna occupy themselves? So this actually is one of the only times when I'm like, yeah, sure, do a couple of funeral games. Acestes, the king, also agrees to this and he thinks it's a great idea. And so together with a bunch of the townspeople, a bunch of the city people, a bunch of people that live there, right? They all start making all of these sacrifices and they do this for 9 days. Now there is one image throughout the 9-day period that we get because, you know, portents and omens are super important in these books. So one of the main ones is that there is a snake that when they're sacrificing does come around the altars that they're actually like doing all of this for. And this very large snake has like 7 coils in it, but it does go round very like uneventfully. It just kind of goes around the altar and then like slithers away. But it is still a portent that I thought I should mention that there is a snake here that's described. So that's kind of an important one. But aside from that, the whole sacrificing is incredibly uneventful. They come to the end of the 9 days, they feast, do all of this sort of stuff, and then they start the funeral games. Now, this is the time that I'm gonna summarize the shit out of it, quite honestly, because they are long. Like every other funeral games, they tell you who's competing, what happens in each race, why each race is taking place, who they sacrifice to for each individual race. Like all of that sort of that's like important obviously when you read it, and it's important obviously to understand the context, to understand all of this stuff, but in these videos, does it make that much of a difference to your understanding of the book? No. Therefore, I'm gonna cut it out. Now, when it comes to my notes, I've never shown you guys my notes for these videos, and I don't know why I never have, but I tell you guys constantly that I make a big summary, then I summarize, and I summarize, and I summarize, and they end up looking like this, okay? I only had to write down on a piece of paper what happened during the races, because I thought there's absolutely no way I'm gonna remember these names. They are literally people that you've never heard of before, and will never hear of again, who take part. Could not remember who won. Could not remember what the events were. So I'm just gonna read these notes to you guys, quite honestly, because the games begin. The funeral games to Anchises begin. So number 1, first race is a boat race. Now this is actually a very eventful race that happens in the book because there's like a lot of the boats sort of steering off. One boat even crashes against the rocks. It's a whole thing. One guy out of the 2 final guys ends up praying to Neptune. It's super dramatic. He prays to Neptune and he's like, help me, make me win. And so Neptune does make that guy win. That guy's name is Cloanthus. That was not a very confident pronunciation, but it's Cloanthus. So that is the guy who wins, and he really wins because he does pray to Neptune and he does get like this whole like blessing from the god and all of that. So he wins that. Following it, there's a foot race. Now in the foot race, Euryalus wins, but that one is also a bit dramatic. There's a lot of tripping up at the end in all of this. And so Aeneas just decides he's in a really good mood. And even though Euryalus does win and he obviously gets the prize, that the other 2 competitors do also get a prize too, because Aeneas is like, you get a prize, you get a prize, you get a prize. Now the third competition is a boxing competition. That's between Dares and Entellus. So both of them end up fighting. They're either just as good as each other or they're just as as each other. Obviously the book is like, they were both so great, but you know, you never really know with these things unless you're there. So anyways, these 2 people fight. Aeneas then decides it's a draw because they have fought so well that it's like, well, you both get prizes now. So basically everybody's getting prizes even though they're all competing, but regardless. The last really main funeral games, there is another event after this, but I'll explain that in a second. The last main games that then take place are an archery games. Now that is super important because if you guys watch my Iliad series, there's a return of a character. Kind of. Okay, well, it's the brother. It's not sort of, it is the brother of a character from the Iliad. If you guys watched the first couple of episodes, there's a character called Pandarus who is known among the Trojans as the best archer, and I call him Goat Killer. And so his brother now pops up, and his brother is going to take part in these games. And so they have this big archery contest, and Pandarus' brother, the Goat Killer's brother, I didn't even write down his name, which I don't know why I would do that. I will literally show you. I just wrote Goat Killer, Pandarus' brother. Useful, I'm not really sure, but either way, he competes and he actually should be the winner. Okay, so he shoots the bird because that's what they're doing in the archery contest. Shoots the bird clean through, kills it beautifully, falls to the ground. Everybody's like, oh, that was stunning, that was beautiful. But Acestes, because bear in mind with funeral games that we not only have the foreign people who are also doing it, so you know we have, and I say foreign because they're on foreign lands technically, but they're all Trojans. So we have all of Aeneas' men that are taking part in these games, but also a lot of the locals. Like Acestes had rallied together a lot of the locals to also take part. So Acestes takes part in the competition, and Acestes decides to fire his bow after Pandarus' brother had done this, you know, gorgeous shot. And when Acestes fires his bow, he ends up winning because the whole arrow part of the thing, right? So when he fires it, the arrow goes through the air and catches fire magically in midair. And because of that, everybody's a bit spooked because they're like, oh my god, clearly a god is on his side, so he must win. But at the same time, you're like, but he didn't have a nicest shot. His arrow just went up into flames, but because of that, he is now the winner. Not the rightful winner. Again, Pandarus' brother is the rightful winner. He's the winner for me. Not that that matters in the grand scheme of things, but to me, I read that and I go, nah, go kill his brother, deserved it. But the last event of these funeral games, and I say the last event because it's not the last competition, because it's more so an equestrian display. So we now have the Trojan youths who get together on these horses, and they basically do this like giant formation show, right? For lack of a better way of understanding that. They just sort of show off on their horses where they're like, look at all the tricks that we can do and the formations that we can make. And it's not really a contest in that way. But they all have a really cute time. Even Ascanius is there. Oh, there's another A name, Ascanius, who's Aeneas' son. So he's even there and he's on one of his horses and he's really enjoying himself. And all the Trojans are having a really, really wonderful time doing these funeral games and celebrating. And it's the first time that things are really looking up for them. You know, they're really comfortable. They're really happy. We can see that everybody's enjoying themselves. And obviously, Juno sees this and she's like, oh, no. So what does she do? Juno does what she does best and she goes to Iris, who is the goddess of the rainbows, but also mainly her messenger goddess. And she tells Iris to go down to the Trojans and basically to up for them because she's like, they're too happy, we need to make them miserable again. And Iris does what she's told. So she goes down to the Trojan women actually who are there. And they're a little bit separated from the games. So she goes down to the Trojan women. She takes on the disguise of this particular Trojan woman called Beroe, I think is her name. I'm gonna write it down below because I didn't make a note of her name stupidly, but you don't need to know it to be quite honest. She takes the form of another Trojan woman and she goes down in disguise and she convinces all of the Trojan women, she breathes all this madness into them, all of this crazy shit that Juno wants them to do, and she makes them set Aeneas's boats on fire. I kid you the not. It is the most dramatic part of this book when these women start going into a frenzy, all because Juno can't let Aeneas be happy for literally 0.5 seconds. And so she makes all of the women go into this crazy frenzy. They're mad, they're tearing at their hair, they go down to the beach, they take all these torches, they start throwing them onto the boats. And obviously Iris, seeing that she's done her job, she's just like, great, bye, and she just leaves. She leaves this madness on the beaches and the boats in flames. The first person to see this is this guy called Eumelus, and he actually tells all of the Trojans what's going on. And so he tells Aeneas and he tells his son Ascanius exactly what's happening down on the ships. Now, because Ascanius is on a horse, he then doesn't even get off the horse, he just rides it immediately down to where the whole drama is unfolding. And Aeneas runs up behind him, so he's on foot, and then Ascanius is on the horse in front of him. And basically, very long speech short, Ascanius gets down to the ships, he sees them all up in flames, he sees the women sort of, you know, jumping about, and he just says, what the f*** is going on? Again, very, very long speech short. Juno is now happy with what she's done now that Ascanius is there and now that Aeneas is there to see the terrible thing that the women have done. And so she lifts the madness from them and they turn around and they see these men staring at them. And the women are so embarrassed by what they've done that they just run. They just leave. They do an Iris, basically, where they just go, oh, nope, shouldn't be here. And so they leave. But guess what that doesn't do? It doesn't help the whole ships burning thing. So the ships are still on fire, right? Obviously, because they didn't bother to help extinguish them. I feel like that would have been the polite thing to do for the women to like come to and be like, we're so sorry. Let's get some water. Let's help you put out these flames. No, they just go, oh, not our problem. We definitely didn't do it, and run off like children, in my opinion. So they leave, right? And the men are just staring at their boats like, what? So Aeneas has this moment where he drops to his knees and he calls up to the gods and he just, you know, asks them to help him basically because he doesn't know what else to do. Like there's so much fire, there are so many boats, all of them up in flames, and he has no idea what else to do apart from to call to the gods to ask for help. And luckily, obviously Juno completely ignores him, but luckily Jupiter does hear him. And so Jupiter, the king of the gods, he sends this torrential downpour and it goes over all the boats to quench? What is the correct word for like putting out a fire? Either way, he puts out the fire with his little torrential rain cloud, which thankfully for Aeneas that happens, but unfortunately he does lose 4 boats in the process. So when Aeneas comes back to the rest of his men, he's sort of pondering what actually to do. He's lost 4 of his boats, and actually setting out to sea, he knows it's his destiny, but at the same time, things are looking pretty good for him on Sicily. Like there hasn't been drama necessarily on Sicily, and that's what he's consciously thinking, that he's thinking, do I stay here? Do I stay on my journey? Now I've lost 4 boats, you know, I don't really know what to do. And so he does have a lot of conflicting thoughts that we get to read through in the book. But one of his old friends, one of his old companions, and when I say old, I mean he is literally old. So it's this old man who comes to him called Nautes, Nautes. He comes to him and he advises that what Aeneas does is still continue on his journey. Obviously, he's like, that's your destiny. You kind of have to do that. But he does advise Aeneas to instead leave a bunch of his men on Sicily because he doesn't have 4 boats to take everybody with him. So he advises Aeneas that he should leave the oldest men or the most inexperienced men so that they don't go on the journey with him and that they can stay with the Trojans safely with Acestes, because he's a really nice man and he's more than happy, probably will be more than happy to take them into his town and into his city as well. Aeneas hears him, he does listen to him, but he still doesn't really know what to do. And so that night he goes to bed and he's visited by the shade of his dad Anchises. So he's lying in bed, and all of a sudden his dad comes before him, and his dad basically says, Nautes has a really good idea in my opinion. You should definitely leave some of the old people there. They're gonna weigh you down anyways. Then get back on the boat and then go to Latium. But I have some instructions for you. The first thing that you have to do before you go to Latium is actually come down to the underworld, because I have things to show you down here. I think you really have to understand your destiny, because clearly it's sort of fading on you and you need something to reinvigorate you and make you really excited. And so therefore come down to the underworld. I'm going to show you the future descendants of the Roman race. And so Anchises instructs him on exactly how to get down to the underworld, which we will see in the next book as well. So he tells him that he has to, first of all, go and find this golden bough, find a priestess to Apollo. They're going to come down into the underworld and then they have to get on the boat. They're going to have to do this, blah, blah, blah. He tells him exactly how to do it and how to do it successfully in order to reach him. Now, before Aeneas can reply, obviously he really wants to, then the shade of his dad does whisk away because it is in a dream. And Aeneas wakes up and he's super upset because he wants to hug his dad. He, calls out into thin air. He tries to, reach it where the shade was. And obviously his dad is gone and it was just a dream. But luckily, Aeneas is now awake. It's now the start of a new day. It is the morning. So he gathers all of his Trojans together and he tells them his plan, which is exactly what we've heard now twice. Once from Nautes and once from Anchises. That was his name. Brilliant that I nearly called him Acestes. But no, so we hear twice of the instructions that he's been given. He relays it for a third time to the Trojans. The Trojans are pretty happy with this. Then Aeneas goes to ask Acestes if he can leave a bunch of the Trojans there. Acestes, again, he's more than happy to have them. And so Aeneas starts helping to lay the foundations of where they'll live in their new homes and all of this and keep that in place. They stick around for another 9 days on the island. Basically, Aeneas is in no rush to leave, which again, his life is pretty good on Sicily, so why would you? They stay for 9 days, they feast, and then all of the men that are going with Aeneas then get on their boats and then they leave. Now, when they're on the sea, this is when Venus gets involved, because as soon as they get on the sea, Venus is like, every single time my son comes on these seas, it's not good for him and something gets up. Which she's not wrong. So she goes down to Neptune and she has this very long speech to Neptune where the essence of it is just, can you promise me that Aeneas is going to make it from point A to point B safely? Because Juno always comes and she f***ed up for him and I'm really not comfortable with that, and I would like it if he could have one solid, easy journey. And Neptune has a really long response, like a really long monologue, but the essence of that speech is just, yeah, sure. I don't know why Virgil wouldn't just write that. But he writes a very extended speech where he does have Neptune also say that's fine, so long as they make the sacrifice to me. Venus says, yeah, sure, that's fine. Just make sure that he's safe. And Neptune is like, Gucci, no problem. And so that is the end of that little conversation. That's important because now we know that no matter what happens to Aeneas, that the boat, or no matter what happens to anybody, actually, really, we'll find out in a hot second, but no matter what happens to anybody, Aeneas will make it to Latium, no matter what happens on the sea, that Neptune is now in his corner to help him. Now, coming up to the end of the book, we now see that even though Neptune can ensure the safeties of the seas, he cannot ensure the safeties of the people on the seas. And this is really shown to us right now because Palinurus is one of the only men on the ships who is awake. Now he's in the leading boat. And so he's steering the leading boat, the other ones are following him. And it's nighttime, so he's the only one who's awake. Everyone else has gone to sleep. And he's more than happy being awake. Because remember, he can read the stars, he knows where they're going, it's not a problem. So he's up by himself, and sleep decides to get involved. There is a personification of sleep, but just so that you guys know, it is just a nice way of saying, this whole thing is a really nice way of saying he fell asleep, right? Is essentially what happens. But the way that Virgil tells us is that Sleep himself, the god of sleep, takes on the form of another Trojan and goes to Palinurus in the middle of the night as he's steering the boat and as he's awake and says to him, I'm wide awake, you can go and take a nap if you want to, don't even worry about it. Palinurus replies saying, no, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm the one that's most comfortable reading the stars and I would much rather wait for somebody else to wake up who's nearly as comfortable as me doing that, then just leave the whole boat in the hands of yours. But obviously the god of sleep is not necessarily happy by this, and so he has this branch, basically, which has been dipped in the river Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness. And so he just waves it across Palinurus's face, but it goes from one temple to the other, which is how I know it's across his face. That's how it's described. And it makes him fall asleep. It makes Palinurus fall asleep and it forget his duties and fall asleep and forget his stress. And so when all of his limbs start to relax, then the god of sleep just throws him overboard. With part of the boat, the last little part of the book is Aeneas waking up, realizing that Palinurus is not steering the boat, so he gets up and he starts steering the boat himself. But obviously, because Neptune has told Venus that the ship will be okay, that he steers the ship whilst they're all asleep into the safety of land, so that they can all, you know, like park the boats and everything like that, or they're in safer waters. So Neptune is taking control, but Aeneas does have a moment where he, you know, calls up to wherever the hell the shade of Palinurus is, and he yells up to him and just says that now his body, because he's gone overboard, is going to be on unknown shores. And that is the end of the book. So hopefully that video wasn't as painful as I thought it was going to be. Anywho, thank you guys so much for tuning in to book 5 of Virgil's Aeneid. We will be seeing you next time with book 6, and book 6 is very exciting because that is a very monumental book for Aeneas. It is a very Homeric book for Aeneas, where he goes down into the underworld to see the future of Rome. And I say it's Homeric because this is a common theme. You know, Odysseus does it in the Odyssey. We have that whole book that happens there halfway through the Odyssey. So this is reminiscent of that, where he goes down, he meets past people. I don't want to give too much away, but he meets past people, and then he meets the future heroes of Rome, and it's beautiful, and I'm very excited to do that. So we'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on Monique. We'll be seeing you next time with book 6, and yeah, see you then.